There are a lot of things you can fake in this world. Clothing, body parts, elections, happiness. But all of those things seem small. You're an ambitious person, you want to go down in infamy. Well, then you're going to have to do something that's as impressive as it is despicable. And what's more impressive than faking an entire country? So sit back and relax while I tell you the story of the biggest scam in history. This is Gregor McGregor, or Gregor McGregor, whichever you prefer. Let me just tell you, all the cattle in the world couldn't produce as much bullshit as this silly, sneaky scumbag Scotsman. If being a manipulative twat was part of the Olympics, he still wouldn't have won, since the first modern Olympics were held more than 50 years after his death, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he was a huge douchebag. From getting a medal from Simeon Bolivar for being an absolute coward, to briefly becoming the ruler of an independent Florida, this man's life story is wild from start to finish. But for the sake of brevity, we're only going to look at what cemented his name in the history books. The fake Republic of Poyais. Our story starts in the year 1820, in the middle of the Latin American Wars of Independence, and McGregor had just gotten the ass-kicking of a lifetime. The Spanish had murdered his entire company, and he only got away due to him being a huge, and I cannot stress this enough, huge coward. Simeon Bolivar, who just a few years prior had given him a medal and hailed him as the Xenophon of the Americas, now wanted him hanged as a traitor. So McGregor fled the lands controlled by Bolivar and ended up at the court of King George Frederick Augustus of the Mosquito Coast. And don't be fooled by this king's regal sounding name. He was basically a tribal chieftain whom the British gave a shiny title and name. His palace also wasn't really a palace in the traditional sense, more just the biggest wooden hut in the village. Really, the only reason these tribals even controlled the Mosquito Coast in the first place was as a British fuck you to the Spanish. This is where McGregor smelled, among other things, an opportunity to get rich. You see, McGregor convinced King George Frederick Augustus to sign a document ceding 32,375 square kilometers, or 4.3 trillion Big Macs of Mosquito territory to McGregor. Just to clarify, this territory is larger than the entirety of Wales. So what did McGregor pay for what's basically an entire country? Some gold and some rum. This motherfucker literally bought an entire country with some shiny metal and alcohol. And the funniest part is, for all intents and purposes, McGregor got the worst end of the bargain. But why is that? Well, dear viewer, let me explain why this land absolutely sucks. Let's start with the people. The land itself might be yours in name, but good luck telling that to the natives. I mean, King George Frederick Augustus, who was a native himself, couldn't do it. What makes you think you could with your pasty white ass face, you fucking asshole? But this land doesn't just suck because of its less than friendly people. Let's look at the infrastructure, or better yet, the lack thereof. By the year 1820, the Americas had undergone colonization for more than 300 years. Surely there are some ports or beacons of Western civilization? Nope, there aren't. The only Western civilization you'll find here are previous colonizers dead in the ground in a cemetery that's by now overgrown by jungle. Yeah, you just bought an entire country filled with dense and hostile jungle. If by now you're not regretting trading the alcohol you could have used to drown your sorrows, then you'll regret it now. This land might look like a postcard, but literally none of it is fit for cultivation. And due to the dense and hostile jungle, this land physically can't sustain livestock either. And even that isn't the worst part. You took this stupid ass deal, meaning you probably don't even have the brain capacity to read. So I'm just gonna spell it out for your dim-witted ass. It's called the Mosquito Coast for a reason. Yep, if starvation, the jungle, the natives, or the hurricanes, yeah, I forgot to mention that even God himself can and will wipe your sorry ass excuse of a village off the map every once in a while. If all of those things don't kill you, the year-long mosquito season will. Good luck treating malaria or yellow fever without modern medicine. So McGregor just made the worst trade deal in the history of trade deals maybe ever. How was he going to turn this into a profit? Very simple. By lying. He christened his new land as Poyais and crowned himself as its cazique. What's a cazique, I hear you ask? Well, it's nothing. It's a fancy sounding title he invented himself. And while everybody in the Americas knew by now that he was full of shit, people in Europe didn't. So that's where he went. Armed with a charming personality and enough bullshit to make terminally online tankies blush, he went on a tour of high society Britain in search of investors and colonists. Now you can say a lot of things about McGregor, but he was thorough. He basically faked everything a country would need. Faked constitution, commercial and banking systems, an honor system, land titles, and a coat of arms featuring fucking unicorns. Post-production Pepper here. The unicorns on Poyais' coat of arms are known to MacGregor's homeland of Scotland, whose national animal is the unicorn. He even designed uniforms for each of the different regiments of the non-existent Poyasian army. At some point, this fake army even had a real soldier, when MacGregor appointed the extremely gullible Major Williamson as member of the Royal Regiment of Horse Guards. And while his country might have been fake, his marketing policy sure as hell wasn't. From interviews in all the newspapers to singers singing ballads about Poyais on the streets of every major British city. But his magnum opus, the linchpin around which everything revolved, was his 355-page book Sketch of the Mosquito Coast, including the territory of Poyais. And just like jelly deals and black pudding, the British loved it, and investments began flowing in. Apart from earning a fortune from selling government bonds, MacGregor also convinced a lot of his fellow Scots to go to Poyais as settlers, and on the 22nd of January 1822, more than 200 hopeful Scottish settlers embarked on a voyage to the supposed land of milk and honey that was Poyais. MacGregor even visited the ship as it embarked from Scotland. Visited, mind you. For obvious reasons, he quickly rowed back to shore. But why even send settlers? After all, MacGregor knew Poyais was fake, and sending settlers could very likely result in their deaths. Very simple. He needed to keep the lie alive. If he kept on telling these amazing stories about Poyais, but didn't allow for people to settle there, well, it's pretty sus. So what happened to the settlers? Spoiler alert, it's exactly what you think happens when you send a ship to an inhospitable stretch of jungle in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. When they arrived at the Mosquito Coast, there was no port, no city, or even people for that matter. Just trees. Endless trees as far as the eye could see. And mosquitoes. Oh god, mosquitoes. When help finally arrived, half a year later, it came in the form of the Mosquito King. Yep, the same one I mentioned earlier with the really fancy name. So how did this king help the poor duped settlers? By telling them to get the fuck off his lawn unless they pledged their loyalty to him. In the end, only 10 people died, which is surprisingly low considering what they had been through. Though a lot of the duped settlers were suffering from disease and were severely malnourished, so had help come a little later, a lot more might have died. MacGregor never actually expected any of the settlers to survive this little endeavour. So when about a year later, a small group of survivors returned to Britain, he shat his pants, packed his bags, told everyone he was getting some milk from the grocery store, and left for France. Where he did the entire thing all over again. He wrote a new book, this time in French, and again convinced people to invest and settle in Poyais. But alas, the French weren't as gullible, and government employees became a bit suspicious when a group of 60 people suddenly wanted passports to travel to a country that wasn't on any map, nor mentioned in any government records. And when the authorities started poking around a bit, MacGregor knew the jig was up. He did that meep meep thing that the blue chicken from that Roadrunner cartoon does, and fled to the Netherlands. And that's kind of where his story ends. He tried to do some smaller Poyais-related schemes in London, but ended those two around the time his wife died. He eventually retired to Venezuela, where he lived out the rest of his days in relative luxury. Because apparently everybody in Venezuela forgot they wanted to hang him and instead gave him an offer of retirement. Pretty disappointing ending, right? Well, that's life. Sometimes the bad guys win. You know what isn't disappointing? Subscribing to my channel. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you when I see you.